Last week, for about half a second, you sounded exactly like them. Not the words. You would never use those words. You have spent years not using those words. It was the tone, that flat, tired, slightly sharp thing that arrives before you have decided anything. It came out, it landed on someone, and then it passed. Nobody at the table looked up, but you heard it, and some part of the evening stayed a little colder after that. So tonight I want to do 3 things. I want to show you what actually gets handed down, because it is not the thing almost everyone thinks it is, and there is now a number for it. I want to explain why the promise you made about this never worked, and why that is not a flaw in you. And I want to leave you with one thing to do that is deliberately smaller than a promise, and that has better evidence behind it. Most of us made that promise young. Mine was in a kitchen. I was maybe 11. I remember deciding, with all the seriousness an 11-year-old can manage, that I would never speak to anyone the way that sentence had just been spoken to me. You probably have your own version. A room, an age, one sentence that arrived and did not leave. And here was the strange part. You kept it, mostly, for years. You built a whole adult life at a careful angle to that sentence, which is exactly why the half-second is so disorienting. It is not the failure of someone who never tried. It is the arrival of something in a house that was locked. 2 things happened online this month, from opposite directions, and they are asking the same question underneath. On the 5th of August, Netflix released the second part of 100 Years of Solitude, the last 50 years of the Buendia family. If you have never read the novel, the thing everyone remembers about it is the names. The family reuses the same small handful. Jose Arcadio, Aureliano, Ursula, Amaranta. Generation after generation, the same names come back around, and with them the same appetites, the same withdrawals, the same wars. Garcia Marquez gave them almost no names to choose from on purpose. It is how the book says, without ever saying it, that these people are running a loop. And late in the book, when a woman finally tries to give her son a name from outside the list, she is overruled. The child is named Aureliano. Meanwhile, on the other app, people are posting a very different thing. Clips of their actual current life, cut against a line of text about the age their parents were when they already had 2 kids. It is funny, and then about 4 seconds in, it is not. One of those is about repeating them. The other is about not measuring up to them. Opposite fears. Same question underneath. How far away from them am I, actually? So let us take the question seriously, starting with the part that I think is genuinely misunderstood. If you ask most people what gets passed down, they would say the methods, the rules, the bedtime, the way money gets talked about or does not, who apologizes first, whether the door gets closed quietly or not at all. We picture inheritance as a set of instructions, and we assume that if we throw the instructions out, we are free. Last year, a team of researchers pulled together 30 years of work on exactly this: 24 separate long-running datasets, 51 peer-reviewed papers, 4088 individual effect sizes, published in Psychological Bulletin, and the question they asked was very plain. How strongly does one generation's parenting predict the next generation's parenting? The answer was 0.12. If you do not spend your evenings reading correlation coefficients, here is the translation. It is small. It is real, but it is small. It is nowhere near a life sentence. The authors describe it, in the careful language of that kind of paper, as modest. I want to hold both halves of that, because either half on its own is a lie. It is not 0. Something does travel, but it is a fraction of what the folklore claims. If you have been walking around with this as a verdict about your future, the data does not support the verdict. Nobody told you that because a small correlation is not a story anyone shares. But the average was not the interesting part. The interesting part was where the transmission was strong and where it was weak. And this is the sentence I would like you to keep, if you keep nothing else tonight. Transmission was strongest for acceptance and negativity. It was weakest for structure and autonomy support. Translate that out of research language. Acceptance and negativity are the warmth and the coldness. The temperature of the room. Structure and autonomy support are the rules and the letting go. The methods. The visible policy of a household. So the methods do not travel well. The temperature does. You did not inherit their playbook. You inherited their weather. And that, I think, is why doing everything differently did not protect you the way you expected it to. You changed the rules. You changed the house, the city, the way you handle a Sunday. You may have gone in the exact opposite direction on every visible decision, and you were right to, and it still did not close the gap, because you were editing the policy and the thing that came through was never the policy. Which brings us to why it shows up as tone. Tone gets installed earlier than argument. You learned what a room feels like when someone is angry and what an apology sounds like, and how much air is safe to take up, long before you had any ability to evaluate any of it. It was not taught to you. It was the medium you learned everything else in. That is the difference between a belief and a default. A belief you can argue with. You can find its weak point, read something better, change your mind at 30. A default does not wait for your opinion. A default ships first and asks later. That is the half second. Now, the promise. I want to be careful here because I think most of us have quietly concluded that if the promise did not hold, that says something about our character. It does not. What it says is that we used a monitoring instrument for a job that needs a replacement. In 1987, Daniel Wegner and his colleagues ran one of the strangest simple experiments in psychology. 34 people alone in a room thinking out loud. Half of them were told at the start to not think about a white bear. Every time a white bear came to mind anyway, they rang a bell. They rang it more than once a minute. And then came the part that made the study famous. Afterwards, when the instruction was lifted and everyone was told they could think about the bear freely, the group that had spent the first stretch suppressing it thought about it more than the group who had never been told to avoid it in the first place. Not less, more. The suppression did not drain the thought, it kept it charged. Researchers have been replicating that rebound in one form or another ever since. Sit with what a vow actually requires. To keep a promise never to become something, some part of you has to keep checking whether you are becoming it, quietly, continuously, in the background of ordinary conversations, which means the thing you swore off has to stay loaded and stay close every day for as long as the promise lasts. You did not fail to keep it far away. Keeping it that close was the job description. And I want to say clearly, because this is the part that would be easy to hear wrong, the promise was not stupid. It was the correct instinct, made by someone young who had no other tools available and who was trying to protect people who did not exist yet. It just does the wrong kind of work. A vow can watch. A vow cannot replace. Jung has 2 lines about this, and both of them get mangled online, so let me give you the real ones. The first is from 1931. In an introduction he wrote for a book about the inner life of children. Nothing, he says, has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. Not what they did, what they did not get to do. The trip that never happened, the instrument in the cupboard, the version of them that got quietly filed away somewhere around 32 and never came up again and was never once mentioned as a loss. That pressure does not stay in one body, it leans on the room. And children are extremely good at reading a room and extremely bad at knowing what they are reading, which is worth sitting with for a second, because it also means most of what came to you was not aimed at you. They were handed most of it too. The second line is the one you have probably seen on a black square with white letters. Until you make the unconscious conscious, you will direct your life and you will call it fate. It is a good line. Nobody can find where he wrote it. What he actually wrote in Aeon is this: when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate. The difference is small and it matters. The popular version promises that awareness gives you control. His version promises something much more modest and much more useful. What you do not look at does not stay inside. It gets acted out. It goes and happens to somebody. Alright, now the part of this that I think actually earns your evening. The strongest evidence that this is not destiny comes from the hardest place anyone has ever looked for it. In 1987, 2 researchers named Kaufman and Ziegler published a paper with a very direct title: Do Abused Children Become Abusive Parents? At the time, the assumed answer was basically yes, and it was repeated everywhere as though it were settled. They went back through the evidence that assumption was built on and found that it did not hold. Their estimate of the actual transmission rate was around 30%, which means that in the most extreme version of this loop that exists, roughly 2/3 of people did not pass it on. And I have to give you the other half of that number, because leaving it out would be its own kind of lie. 30% is also several times higher than the rate among people without that history. So both things are true at once, and you need both. It is real, and it is not fate. So then the useful question is not whether the loop exists. It is what the 2/3 did. A study the following year out of a long-running project in Minnesota went looking for exactly that. Egeland, Jakovitz, and Trufe in child development, comparing the mothers who broke the cycle with the mothers who did not. 3 things separated them. One adult, somewhere in their childhood, who is safe, a period of therapy at some point in their life, and a stable, supportive relationship with a partner. Look at what is not on that list. Willpower is not on that list. Vows are not on that list. Being a better person is not on that list. Trying harder does not appear anywhere in the findings. All three of those things are actually the same shape, another person, and enough time to say the thing out loud. And attachment research adds one more detail that I find quietly extraordinary. When researchers assess whether an adult is likely to pass on security to their own child, the strongest signal is not how good their childhood was. It is whether they can tell it as a coherent story. Not resolved, not forgiven, not reframed into something positive, coherent. A beginning, a middle, and a clear account of what it did to me. People who can do that with a difficult history do about as well as people who simply had an easy one. Which is, when you think about it, an oddly gentle finding. It does not ask you to feel differently about any of it. It asks you to be able to describe it without the story falling apart in your hands. So here is the thing to do, and I have made it deliberately smaller than a promise. Pick one scene, not your family, not your childhood. One recurring 30-second scene where the tone shows up. The second question when you are already tired. The Sunday phone call. The moment somebody spends money you would not have spent. You know which one it is. You knew before I finished the sentence. And afterwards, not during, say, one sentence to yourself. Who was that? Not as an accusation, as an identification, the way you would name a bird. You will not catch it during. I want to say that clearly, so you do not treat it as a test you failed. During is too fast. That is the entire point of a default. Afterwards is where this is available. Because you cannot suppress a default. We covered why. But you can make one visible, and a visible default slowly loses its automatic quality by being seen, not by being fought. The variable here is not intensity. It is count. How many times you noticed. 10 quiet noticings will do more than one enormous resolution. And one enormous resolution is what most of us have been trying since we were 11. And if you want a second thing, tell one person the story, out loud to a face once. Beginning, middle, and what it did to you. That is the coherence finding, and it is the part the research keeps pointing back at, and it is also the only part of tonight that requires anybody else. It is going to happen again, probably this week. When it does, you do not have to stop it. You almost certainly cannot. You just have to be half a second late, long enough to hear it, name it, and decide who gets the rest of the sentence. That is the entire difference between repeating something and carrying it. The Buendias could not change the names. Every time someone tried, the room voted them down and the old name came back. But that is a novel, and a novel is allowed to be a closed loop. You get the half second. It is not much. It is genuinely not nothing. Mine still shows up, usually when I am tired and somebody asks me a second question. I have stopped treating it as evidence of who I am. It is evidence of where I learned to talk. Those are different things. Thanks for spending this one with me. If tonight landed somewhere, the porch light stays on. I will see you in the next one.